Hello, Blake Rudis here, back again with day 7 of the 30 Days of Photoshop Challenge. Now, in day 6, we talked about setting up your workspace and getting Photoshop set up for efficiency so that you can come into Photoshop and know exactly where you need to go and what you need to do every single time because you've got a workspace built specifically for you and your needs. That's really important as we progress through because now we're going to talk about layers and layer types. So everything that happens from here on, I'm assuming that you've already set up a workspace that's going to be efficient for you. So now when we talk about layers, this is actually the backbone of everything in Photoshop. Actually, the only reason why we'd use Photoshop over any other editing program is because of its layer capability. It has the possibility of giving us basically unlimited potential when we will work in terms of layers. But layers are everyone's worst enemy and best friend at the exact same time. Layers can be really frustrating because you have to think about a two-dimensional object now has three-dimensional layers. So I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible to learn layers. Because actually, I was self-taught in Photoshop in 1998. It wasn't until 4 years later that I actually really truly understood layers when I had a professor in college that was very good with layers and teaching layers. So I'm going to give you kind of my mix of Blake learning on his own and Blake learning from this professor and give that to you so that you can get the best understanding of layers possible. So in Photoshop, there are 4 main types of layers. There is the pixel layer, which is a layer that actually is comprised of pixels. There is an adjustment layer, which is a layer that knows absolutely no bounds. It can do whatever it wants because it's just a layer that's made up of calculations. It looks like a blank layer, but it actually has calculations going on in it. We'll talk about those more in day 8. And then we have an empty layer or a transparent layer that is waiting for information, and also a transparent layer that has information or pixels in it. And the last one is a vector layer, which is basically anything that's text or shapes. So to give you a demonstration, this is a pixel layer. This is a single layer that is comprised of black and just straight black. All it has in it is black pixels. Okay, there's no other information in here but just basically filling a layer with black. Very similarly to a pixel layer will be anything we bring in from Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. Once we pass off a RAW file into Photoshop, it becomes a pixel-based layer. So it's basically comprised of pixels. And we can press Control and Spacebar or Command and Spacebar on a Mac or the Zoom tool, which is Z, and we can zoom in back here and we can see that this image is actually made up of very small pixels. If I zoom around and actually find a tree stump here, these are the pixels that comprise this image. So I can right click here and say fit on screen. So this is a pixel based layer. It's got pixels or very small dots of information that create an image. At the very small microscopic level, this image is really just comprised of little squares of blue, black, whatever colors would make this up, yellow, orange, gray. And when we zoom in really close, they all almost look the same. But it's how we zoom out and we see how all the colors coming together to create a photograph. Okay. This is an adjustment layer. It knows no bounds. Basically, what this adjustment layer is doing is it's making calculations on this photo to say, hey, I need you to turn black and white. But if we turn the layers off underneath it, it does nothing. It's not a blank layer. This is an adjustment layer. It's made up of calculations that are telling what's underneath it to change, and that's the result that you're seeing when it's on top. And we'll talk about layer order, we'll talk about adjustment layers, we'll talk about all this stuff a lot more as we progress through the 30 days. Right now, I'm just trying to give you a basic understanding of what all these layers are. This layer, even though it's on, hasn't done anything to our photo. Why not? Because it's an empty layer. This layer, if we do this, it's actually a blank layer. It's got nothing on it. The gray and the white that you're seeing under there is not actually the pixels that make this up. The gray and the white in the background are actually showing you that, hey, this is a transparency. This is Photoshop's way of saying the data that's in this, there's nothing here. But if we press B for our brush tool, and I just brush on this and just say hi, I've now added pixels to this blank layer. So now it's a pixel layer with transparency around it. And I know that because if I were to turn on this pixel layer below it, we actually see that writing on there that says hi, but we can see the black underneath. The last layer that I want to talk about here before we move on to layer order and understanding layers is a vector layer. Now, a vector layer is made up of text or shapes when they're in their text or shape form. before it becomes a rastered layer or a pixel layer. And the reason why you need to understand this is that a vector layer is actually made up of vectors around it. It is actually not made up of pixels. So what that means is that if we press Command or Control T on this, and I'm just going to transform this and make this bigger, much bigger. As I make this bigger, you'll look what happens here. The quality of this did not change, but you'll notice if we were to ever take a regular photo and try to make it bigger, the quality changes like crazy because we're telling pixels to become something that they're not by making them bigger. A vector-based layer will not do that. Actually, if we were to press and look at the type tool here, this went from being a 100 point font to a 289.6 point font. And I know that because if I go in my history tab, and I scroll all the way down here and go back to before we transformed it, instead of just making this bigger, it actually told the points or the vectors of this to become larger. So we'll talk more about vector layers later when we talk about smart objects, which is much later in our 30 days. Right now, I just wanted to give you the 4 basic layer types: a pixel layer, an adjustment layer, which we'll talk more about tomorrow in day 8, an empty layer or a transparent layer, and a vector layer, which is shapes, text, and that sort of thing that are made up of vectors and not pixels. Let's jump over here to this next image that I have, and you can download both of these and follow along as you see fit. But this is actually how I learned layers. I was given a plate in Photoshop by my professor, and I was given a series of vegetables, and I was told to make a plate of vegetables for him. And then he graded our work based on how well we made that plate of vegetables. I'm not grading your work. This isn't college. This isn't high school. But I do want you to experiment with this because this is the best way to actually understand layers and layer types and how they are. So this is the layers palette or layers window. If at any time you lose this, let's say this gets taken out and it's gone. You're like, oh no, where'd my layer? I can't work now because, well, there's stuff's here, but I can't see what layer is what. Well, just go up to Window, don't freak out, and then press Layers. Okay, that's your layers, and we want to make sure that in our workspace that this is in this area right here because it becomes easier to see if this is right here. That's exactly where I like it. I like layers, channels, then paths, and I don't even use paths that much, but I do use layers a lot. So first things first, when we look at layers here, let's see. I'm going to give you a little test. This background layer here is what? It's a pixel layer, okay? This is a pixel layer as well, but what does it have around it? Transparency. I hope that's what you said, okay? So here, this is all part of layer control. So let's just start off first by dissecting the layers window. We'll talk about fill and opacity at a later time. We'll talk about this thing here that says blend modes at a later time. Don't worry about that. But right now, all I want you to do is understand these different tools right here and the layers palette itself. So let's talk about layer order and how we organize things. So you'll see right here, there's an eyeball next to everything. If we turn the eyeball on or off, that is going to make it disappear or come back. Now it's not actually going anywhere. We're not deleting it when we do this. Now you can't even click on this layer and press delete. If you want to delete something, you have to drag it down to this trash bucket and that deletes the layer. Now let's say we didn't want to do that. I'm going to teach you your first shortcut here, Command or Control Z. Remember that, Command or Control Z. That will undo anything that just happened, okay? And you're gonna be using that one a lot. My fingers are usually just at that position of Command or Control Z to step backwards in the history palette. And that's basically what it's doing. So if I move this down here and delete this, okay, look at the history palette. If I press Control Z, you notice how it just jumps back to the last state, the last history state that we had there, okay? So we turn the preview on or off on all of these. That is the preview of the layer that's on there. Now that doesn't necessarily tell you the layer order, and we can turn these off and on in any order that we want. Or we can click on one of them and drag up as we hold that left click and then undo and then release the click and all of them disappear. We can click and hold and drag down and that will make all of them reappear. Now let's say I just want to look at one individual layer. I can press Alt or Option and click on the eyeball, and that's going to say, okay, now you're just looking at this watermelon. From here, I can either turn on each one of these eyeballs individually to get everything back, or I can press Alt or Option and click on that eyeball, and everything comes back. All the previews come back. Now, if you do press Alt or Option and click on this watermelon, and then say preview on this cherry, and then try to press Alt or Option on that watermelon again, it's not going to make everything come back. The only way to make everything come back after you've pressed Alt or Option on an individual layer is to press Alt or Option on the preview of that individual layer again. Otherwise, you have to click on each individual layer and turn them on again, okay? So that's the previews of layers. Now we can move layers. So let's see here. We have the cherry up here, and then we have these two cherries right here. So these are the cherry twins, and this is the cherry. Well, let's say I want to move this layer next to this layer so that they are on top of one another. Okay, now that these layers are close, I know that they're close, so they aren't separate from each other on the layers palette. When I'm working with layers, I like to make sure that all of the layers that I have are within close proximity of one another, so that layers that belong to each other don't get lost. Now, when we move this layer in here, you're going to notice that it doesn't actually move the layer, does it? It doesn't move the actual physical object. What it does is it just moves the layer order and how it appears here in the layer stack. If we wanted to physically move these cherries, I need to get the Move tool. So I can press V for the Move tool. That's another hotkey you're going to be using a lot. Or if I'm on another tool here, there is a Move tool right here. So let's say I've got the cherries selected, this one singular cherry. I can click it and I can drag it around and I can move it. Now notice how on some it's on top of some and it's under others. Why is that? Now you'll see these purple guides all over the place. Those are actually really helpful. They might seem like a pain at first, but you'll get used to them. Those guides actually help you center things to make sure that you're centered with other things. When it comes to graphic work, you're really going to want those. If you don't want those, press Command or Control H and that will get rid of them. Those are called guides. Command or Control H and that will bring them back. Now, what does that actually mean? If we go to the View and we go here to Extras, Command or Control H, we can undo that so that they disappear, or we go to View and then we can click them on so that they're there. So those extras are actually, I think they're really helpful for getting things lined up. That means that these are nice and lined up now, okay? So this cherry is on top of some and under others. So it's underneath the watermelon. Why is that? Why is it underneath the watermelon here, but it's on top of the avocado? Well, that's because of the layer order. So now if I were to move this watermelon underneath this cherry and then click on that cherry and move it around, now I'm moving that cherry around and it's on top of the watermelon and on top of the avocado. If I want that cherry to be underneath that watermelon and the avocado, I'll just move that cherry on down. It's still there and we can still move it. So in the Move tool, there's something up here that says Auto Select. That can be helpful if, like, let's say we click Auto Select and then we click on this. That's going to click on the broccoli and allow us to move the broccoli. Now, that can be helpful, but sometimes when we do auto select, it can grab things that we don't want it to because it's automatically selecting it. So here's the trick. We're going to turn off this auto selection. So now if we press the Command key, just press and hold Command, this will show us what we're going to be clicking on. That's why I like to have these guides. If I do this, it's clicking on the background. If I press Command and then I click on this, it's going to select the background. If I press Command and click on the pepper, I now can move the pepper around, okay? So this is really, it might seem simplistic, but this is the best way to learn layers, I promise you. So now this pepper, let's move it around. Where is it? Well, it's on top of the avocado because of where it is in the layer stack, but it's underneath the cherry twins and it's underneath the watermelon, but it's above that regular cherry. So let's say we want the pepper to be below everything else. What we're gonna do is move that pepper all the way down here, and that will be under there. Now, as your homework, let's just take everything here, the avocado, the broccoli, and the pepper, and put them all together. So now we have the avocado, the broccoli, and the pepper. All of the green things are now together in this layer stack. There's a couple things we can do to make sure that they stay together. Now let's say we wanted to move all of these together. If we press the Command or Control key, we can click on these layers and select multiple layers at a time. So now I've got the broccoli, the avocado, and the pepper all selected, and I can move them around because they're all selected together. Now, they're all selected together, so they move together. But there is a way that we can make sure that all of these stay together. Now, because I have them all selected, if I press Command or Control G, that will put them into a group. If I don't want to use the hotkey for that, or if I forget the hotkey, right down here you see a folder. This is going to make a group. Now we can call this group Green Things. Okay, so now if we grab this whole group, we can move the whole group together. And then they don't even need to be all selected underneath here because they're in a group. Now what you'll notice is that when layers are in a group, they move over to the right. They're kind of right justified a little bit. You see that? There's a group right here. In this group, all of these layers belong. If by chance one of the pepper comes out of that group, we can just drag it until we see a blue line down there. Now you'll see that this pepper is no longer in the group. So if we move the group, look at that. The pepper doesn't move with the rest of the green things because it's not in the group anymore. Well, if we grab the pepper and drag it up, we can now drag it into that group of green things, and now we can move the green things around. Okay. So that's one way that we can make sure that they stay together, by being in a group. But let's see here. Let's see, we have the cherry and the cherry twins. So we want these to be able to move together at any given time. What we can do here is we can grab both of them, Command or Control, and click on each other. And then we can right click here. And what we can do here is we can say link layers. And now you'll see a little link icon between them. That way they don't have to be in a group, but they still move together because they're linked together. Anytime we move one, it's going to move the other along with it without them being in a group. So you won't know that it's connected with another object until you click on it and you see the link of what it's connected to. So when we click on the watermelon, it's not connected to anything. We can move this wherever we want. It's not linked to anything. These cherries, though, they are now linked together, and we can move them wherever we want. One of the things we can do here also is we can double click on any item and we can rename it. Now this is the apple. We haven't talked about the apple yet. I'm going to call this apple, probably because I didn't name it. I always get in the habit of naming my layers, because if you don't name your layers, they're going to come back to bite you in the butt. Okay, so now we're going to take this apple and we're going to move it around. All right, move the apple up to there. Good. So we got the apple and we got all of the red things together. Now we can even put these guys into a group. So let's do this. Let's grab the apple. We'll press and hold Shift and click on the cherry that's on the top. The cherry on top. I didn't even do that on purpose. And we'll press Command or Control G to put them into a group. We'll double click this and call this red things. Okay. So now the red things and the green things are in a group. If at any time we don't want to see one of them over the other, we can turn the preview off on them. So now they're off. We can move them all together. Now they're moving together because they're all in the same group together. Now they're going to move equally spaced. Wherever they are on that plate, they're going to move equally spaced because they're in a group. If we want to move an individual one, we can still press Command and click and now just move the apple by itself. Even though it's still in that group, we can move each individual one by itself. Now the reason why when I Control click on this cherry and try to move it, it's moving with the other cherry. Why? Because it's linked. If we want to unlink it, we right click and we say unlink layers. So now these cherries can move individually from the single cherry. The cherry twins can move singularly from the cherry. One thing that I want to talk about here are the locks, okay? So these locks are actually really quite clever. Here we can see that this is, let's just look, we'll pick on the apple now because it hasn't been picked on yet. Let's lock the transparency of this apple. Okay, so we'll click this button here and that's going to lock all the transparent areas around the apple. And then let's do this. Let's turn off the green things in the dinner table and all the other red things except the apple. Now let's say I want to take my brush tool. So I'll press B for my brush tool, and you can just use this whatever color here is, if there's black here, whatever. And I brush on this layer. Notice how it's not going to go into the transparent area. It's only allowing me to brush on that apple. That's because we told the transparent areas to be locked, meaning any effect that happens on this apple, we don't want it to happen on the transparent areas. If we didn't have that locked, let's go back here and unlock that. So we can either click this lock right here to unlock it, or we can click on the icon here to unlock it. And I were to brush now it's going all over the place because we didn't lock the transparency first. So I don't often use that, but there's times when you might accidentally hit one of these locks and then go, uh-oh, what just happened? Like here, if we say lock image pixels, and then I try to use my brush tool on it, you're gonna see, oh, whoa, hold on a second. Could not use the brush tool because the layer is locked. And you might think to yourself, oh crap, well, how am I supposed to fix that? Well, you either uncheck this little lock right here, or you uncheck this right here. This is basically saying, hey, we're locking the pixels down of this layer so that it can't be affected. No other pixels can affect this image, so we can't brush on this one. All right, here we can lock the movement. So we can't move this. We can still brush on it, but we won't be able to move the layer. It's going to say could not use the move tool because this layer is locked. Now that can be helpful if, let's say, you're working with these layers and you say, you know what, I absolutely positively do not want this apple to move. Well, you can lock the apple's movement so it can't go anywhere. This one right here is going to be preventing auto nesting of in artboards. I don't use artboards a lot, and I don't think you're going to use them very much either. Okay, so I'm not worried about that one. And this one right here is going to lock everything. It's going to lock movement. It's going to lock pixels. I can't move it. I can't paint on it. I can't do anything to this because this layer is on lockdown. I don't often use these. If I do use these locks, I pretty much am looking at the background layer or the bottommost layer and locking it so that it stays stable while everything else above can move. So I know this is just over a 20-minute crash course on layers, and there's a lot to do with layers. Actually, pretty much everything that we do from here on out is going to be based off of layers. This is just a basic understanding of layers. What are those 4 layer types again? Well, we have a pixel-based layer, we have an adjustment layer, we have a blank or transparent layer, and then we have a vector layer, which is going to be anything that's made out of shapes or text, which we aren't concerned with that too much right now, predominantly because we're photographers and you won't be using that very often in your photo post-production or your photo manipulation. We then talked about layer order, how you can group layers together, how you can visualize layers, lock layers, view the extras, auto-select those layers, group those layers, lock those layers. We talked a lot about layers. So what your homework today is, I want you to take this document and I just want you to move layers around. I want you to move them around in the layers palette. I want you to put them into groups. What I'd like you to do is actually make 2 groups with the green things and the red things. Okay, that's it. Just make 2 groups with all your green vegetables and another group with all of your red vegetables, and just move them around and manipulate them and make these fruits and vegetables mixed up on the plate. All right. You can't hurt this. Actually, if you do feel like you've messed this up, all you have to do is re-download the document and you're ready to go. But experiment with just layers and groups. While I don't necessarily use a lot of the locking tools and all those features that happen in that layers palette, I do use groups a lot. Actually, groups are very important to my workflow. So I will be using groups a lot, and I'll be showing you how to put your layers into groups as we build different effects and styles to manipulate our photographs. In tomorrow's video, we're going to be talking about adjustment layers. Now, these are probably my favorite thing on the planet, and that's where we're going to start to build up a lot of different fun things in Photoshop, is with adjustment layers.